In the sprawling, restless city of Los Angeles lived a young woman named Aria Voss. To the wealthy patrons she served at Caruso's Italian restaurant and the hurried crowd she navigated on cold October streets, she was nearly invisible, just another face moving through the background of other people's lives. She had learned to blend into shadows, to make herself small, to exist without demanding space or attention. The restaurant's candlelit dining room knew her only as silent hands clearing plates, as shoulders that never hunched no matter how many hours she stood. But beneath that careful invisibility lived a woman drowning in silence. Her Subaru sat in the parking lot of a 24-hour laundromat in East Los Angeles, where she kept a sleeping bag folded behind the front seat and a thermos she refilled at gas station bathrooms. The car's paint had faded to a ghostly white, the fabric on the driver's seat worn through to foam. Behind the steering wheel was her entire life reduced to what fit in a two-door sedan. A change of clothes. 2 pairs of shoes. A plastic bag containing toiletries purchased one item at a time when she could afford them. October had stripped the city down to its skeletal truth. The wind carried the smell of diesel and rotting fruit, and her breath hung in small clouds as she walked to her shift at Caruso's. 5:30 in the morning. The sky was still black. Her stomach was still empty. She had learned to stop noticing hunger. At a McDonald's bathroom in the Arts District, she washed her face with brown paper towels that felt like sandpaper against her skin. The bathroom smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. She changed into her work uniform in a stall, black pants, black shirt, the fabric stiff from being line-dried on the fire escape of an abandoned building where she sometimes slept when the laundromat got too crowded. She looked at herself in the mirror. 28 years old but looking decades older. Her eyes had the hollow quality of someone who had learned to want nothing. In her pocket, $34. That was all. $34 to last until payday, which was 9 days away. She touched the worn prayer card tucked behind her driver's license. Her mother's handwriting on the back, barely legible now after so many years of handling. Aria, my sweet girl, God sees you even when the world does not. The card was the color of old parchment, the edges frayed, but it was the last thing her mother had given her before the cancer took her voice, then her breath, then everything. Her storage unit held the photographs. 17 boxes of memories. An eviction notice had arrived last week. $35,000. She owed $35,000 she did not have, and in 3 days the lock would be cut and everything would be gone. Her mother's face, smiling in a garden. Her parents' wedding photo. The only evidence that she came from something, from someone who loved her. 3 days. The morning her daughter ran into the street changed everything. But no. Not her daughter. Emma Caruso. The little girl belonged to someone else. Aria was just the woman who happened to be walking to work on a dry October afternoon when a red balloon escaped a child's hand and Emma, 5 years old and quick as a sparrow, chased it directly into the path of an oncoming car. Aria did not think. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She grabbed Emma around the waist and pulled the child backward. The car rushed past, so close the wind from it tore the breath from both their lungs. For a moment they stood on the sidewalk, both shaking, the red balloon disappearing into the sky like a prayer ascending. A man stood across the street, watching. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of something far heavier than muscle. His coat was charcoal cashmere, worth more than her annual rent. His hands were large and powerful, the left one adorned with a silver ring bearing a crest she did not recognize. His dark hair was swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from stone, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, an eyes the color of a winter storm, gray and penetrating and utterly unreadable. Emma's father. Though Aria did not know this yet. She held the child until Emma's breathing slowed, until the trembling subsided. The girl looked up at her with wide eyes. "Thank you," Emma said simply. "My daddy says I am too far sometimes." Aria smiled. She had forgotten what smiling felt like. That evening, as Aria returned to Caruso's and moved between tables with her head lowered, a man in a charcoal cashmere coat arrived and was escorted to the private booth in the back. the one where candlelight turned the wine the color of old blood. Giovanni Caruso had come to his restaurant, as he did most nights, to conduct business quietly in the shadows. He recognized her immediately. Giovanni Caruso was 47 years old and had not cried since he was 14. That was the year his father had been shot in front of him, in front of the entire family, on the steps of the Cathedral of Our Lady of Angels. That was the year his childhood had ended and his war had begun. For 33 years he had built an empire in Los Angeles, not just the restaurant, though Caruso's was legendary, but a network of businesses that stretched across the city like the roots of an ancient tree. Import-export. Real estate. Security. Things that required men who understood loyalty, men like Bruno and Franco, who sat across from him now in his private booth, confused by the expression on their boss's face. "You saw her," Franco said. It was not a question. "I saw her," Giovanni replied, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "The waitress." Bruno leaned back in his chair, studying his boss. "In 15 years, I have never seen you look at anyone like that." Giovanni's jaw tightened. He did not answer. Instead, he watched through the gap in the restaurant's interior window as Aria moved between tables, clearing plates with movements so economical, so practiced, that she seemed almost to float. He noticed things. The way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching. The way her uniform hung on a frame that was too thin. The way she paused at one of the high windows and looked out at the city lights with an expression that broke something in his chest. She had saved his daughter's life. And she did not know who she had saved it from. Margaret Harrington watched from the bar, a glass of champagne suspended in her perfectly manicured hand. She was 56, though her surgeon kept her looking 41. Her blonde hair was cut with precision, her jewelry understated but worth more than most houses. She was the silent partner at Caruso's, the owner of the money that made everything possible. She had built her wealth on the backs of men like Giovanni Caruso, men who understood that power required ruthlessness and that the people beneath them existed for one purpose only, to serve or to be forgotten. Margaret watched Giovanni watch Aria, and something cold moved behind her eyes. 3 months passed. 3 months of careful, invisible mercies. A shift change. Suddenly Aria was working lunch service instead of the brutal 8 to midnight closing shift. The manager, Douglas Hale, a man with cold eyes and colder hands who had been skimming her tips for 2 years, seemed confused by the order, but he followed it. Another mercy, an unexpected bonus in her paycheck. $100. Just 100, but enough to keep her storage unit from being auctioned for 1 more month. A table with a heater near the kitchen. Always the warmest seat in the restaurant, reserved for special guests, but somehow Aria found herself stationed there more and more often. Warmth in October. Small miracles that she did not understand but had learned to accept without asking questions. The prayer card tucked in her pocket grew warm against her skin. Giovanni Caruso never spoke to her. He never acknowledged her directly. But his eyes followed her through the dining room, and Bruno and Franco had learned not to comment on it. They understood, in the way men who worked in his world understood things, that something had shifted. That a young woman named Aria Voss had become important without knowing it. Meanwhile, in her Subaru parked in the laundromat lot, Aria counted her savings. $3,000 now. Enough to pay the storage unit for 6 more months. Enough, if she was very careful, to stop sleeping in the car for a few nights a week and find a room somewhere. A small room. A room of her own. She did not know who was responsible. She thought it was luck. She thought maybe, finally, her life was starting to change. But at the same hour that Aria counted her money and allowed herself a dangerous hope, Margaret Harrington sat across from Douglas Hale in a coffee shop far from Caruso's. Douglas was thin and nervous, with the look of a man who had made choices he regretted but refused to face. "She is becoming a problem," Margaret said quietly, her voice like silk over steel. "My partner has taken an interest. A dangerous interest." The waitress. Douglas swallowed his coffee too quickly, burned his throat. The invisible girl has become visible. And that cannot be allowed. Douglas understood. In his world, when someone became visible, when someone attracted the wrong kind of attention, there were ways to make them disappear again. Permanent ways. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Margaret Harrington smiled. It was not a kind smile. Everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 3 months earlier, when Giovanni Caruso did not even know Aria Voss existed, to the moment when everything changed. 3 months earlier, on an October afternoon when the Los Angeles wind cut through the streets like a blade wrapped in ice, Aria Voss walked toward Caruso's restaurant with her hand wrapped around the money in her jacket pocket. $34. She had counted it 3 times that morning while sitting in her Subaru in the laundromat parking lot, her breath fogging the windshield, her fingers moving through the bills with the precision of someone whose survival depended on arithmetic. $34 had to last until Friday. 3 days. 3 days to stretch into food, into gas, into the small miracle that would keep her alive long enough to earn her next paycheck. But $34 would not solve the larger mathematics of her life. The storage unit holding the last photographs of her mother, the one she had not looked at in 6 months because looking at them cost her something essential, that storage unit was due in 3 days. $35,000. The number sat in her chest like a stone. She had saved $3,000 by working double shifts, by eating the leftover pasta that Douglas Hale threw away at closing time, by sleeping in her car and showering at the gym's locker room with a day pass she shared with another homeless girl. $35,000 might as well have been $35 million. The gap between what she had and what she needed was not a number. It was a chasm. The October streets of East Los Angeles stretched before her, skeletal and honest in their decay. Dead leaves skittered across the pavement like desperate things trying to escape. The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with rotting fruit from the market 3 blocks back, and her breath hung in small clouds in front of her face as she walked. She did not think about the cold. She had trained herself not to think about discomfort. Discomfort was a luxury for people with choices. 3 blocks from Caruso's, on Maple Street where the sidewalk buckled and the storefronts had been boarded up for years, Aria heard the sound first. A child's laughter, bright and high and innocent, cutting through the street noise like a bell. Then the sound of her own heart stopping. The red balloon was enormous, impossible, floating at the height of a 2nd-story window. It bobbed and drifted on the wind, and the child chasing it could not have been more than 6 years old. She wore a pink coat and her hair was dark and she was running directly toward the corner where Maple met 4th Avenue. Aria did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up, before fear or calculation could intervene. She dropped her work bag and ran. The sedan came from the direction of 4th Avenue, traveling at 40 miles per hour, the driver distracted, looking at his phone. Aria saw the moment the driver looked up. Saw his face change. Saw the brake lights bloom red like blood flowers blooming on the windshield. She was 20 feet away. Then 10. Then she was diving, her arms wrapping around the child's waist, pulling her sideways with every ounce of strength she possessed. The child weighed nothing, was all small bones and surprised breath. They hit the pavement together, rolled, the child's body tucked against Aria's chest as the sedan's brakes shrieked. The smell of burning rubber flooded the street. The wind of the car's passage blew Aria's hair across her face. For one moment that stretched into eternity, there was only the sound of metal and friction and the child's gasp of shock. Then silence. Then the driver's door opening. Then the small, trembling voice of the child, whimpering, "I want my daddy. I want my daddy." Aria held her. She held this small girl with dark curls and a pink coat, held her with the tenderness of someone who understood the exact weight of a human being who mattered. She rocked her slightly, the way she had seen mothers do in the waiting room of the free clinic. "You are safe now, sweet girl. You are safe. I have you. You are going to be okay." Emma Caruso, though Aria did not know her name, would not know it for several more minutes, buried her face in this stranger's shoulder and cried. Her small hands clutched Aria's threadbare jacket. Behind them, the balloon had caught on the awning of a closed store, still bobbing, still impossibly red. Footsteps approached. A man's footsteps, measured and unhurried at first, then faster. Aria looked up and saw him standing across the street, frozen in a way that suggested his entire body had turned to stone. He was tall, perhaps 38 years old, wearing an overcoat that cost more than Aria's car. His hair was dark, silvered at the temples. His eyes were the color of a storm about to break, and they were fixed on the child in Aria's arms with an intensity that made the air feel thin. He approached, and Aria felt the shift in the world's gravity. This was a man accustomed to being obeyed. It was visible in the way he moved, in the angle of his shoulders, in the simple fact that the street seemed to rearrange itself around him. Emma. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. Emma, sweetheart, look at me. Emma lifted her head from Aria's shoulder, her face blotched red from crying, her breath coming in hiccups. Daddy. He knelt. This man in his overcoat that cost 3 months of Aria's salary knelt on the pavement beside them. His hands were large, marked by a thin scar that ran from his left wrist down into his palm. He took Emma gently, and she wrapped herself around him with the desperation of a child who had been afraid she would never see him again. Thank you, he said to Aria, and his eyes met hers for the first time. The full weight of his attention was like standing in front of a fire. You saved her life. Aria stood up, brushing dead leaves from her jeans. It was nothing. I just saw, if anyone would have. No. He stood, Emma balanced against his hip. Not anyone. You. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Something cold and dangerous stirred beneath the surface, like a predator recognizing another predator. Then he was handing her a business card, the cardstock expensive and cream-colored. Caruso's. I own the restaurant. If you need anything, work, money, anything at all, you ask for Giovanni. You ask for me. Understood. Aria took the card. Her hand was shaking slightly. She nodded. What is your name? He asked. Aria. Aria Voss. He repeated it once, as if committing it to memory. As if her name mattered. As if she mattered. I will see you soon, Aria Voss. Then he was gone, walking back toward the black SUV parked at the corner, the child still in his arms, both of them disappearing into a vehicle with tinted windows that seemed to swallow light. Aria stood alone on Maple Street, the business card in her hand. She did not know who this man was. She did not know that Giovanni Caruso controlled the Los Angeles underworld with the precision of a general surveying a battlefield. She did not know that his family had built an empire on loyalty and violence, on a code of honor that was both beautiful and merciless. She knew only that a man had thanked her for saving his daughter's life, and that something in his eyes suggested that her decision to act had consequences she could not yet see. That evening, Aria pushed through the service entrance of Caruso's at 5:15. The restaurant was not yet open to the public, but the kitchen hummed with preparation. The smell of garlic and basil and simmering tomato sauce filled the air, mixing with the sharp bite of bleach used to clean the floors. The dining room was a cathedral of candlelight, each table set with white linens and crystal glasses. The wine in the bottles caught the light like blood, the color of old memory. She changed into her uniform in the cramped bathroom, the black dress hanging loose on her frame. She had lost weight over the past months without realizing it, her body becoming more efficient at survival, less burdened by flesh. She tied her hair back and wiped her hands on her thighs and pushed back into the dining room. Douglas Hale was standing near the host station, smoking a cigarette despite the no-smoking ordinance, his eyes tracking her movement with the particular attention of a predator who had identified a weakness. He was thin, perhaps 43 years old, with slicked-back hair that looked practiced and false. His suit was expensive but worn with the arrogance of someone who believed money could purchase dignity. "You are 3 minutes late," he said without looking at her. "That comes out of your pay. Tonight you are going to work stations 5 through 9. 18 tables. There is a private party in the back room at 7, and they have requested additional staff. You are it. Aria did not respond. Response was provocation in Douglas's universe. Also, he continued, dropping his cigarette and grinding it under his shoe, the tips tonight go into the general pool. I will be distributing them fairly. This was a lie they both understood. The general pool meant his pocket. He had done this 17 times in the past month. She had not complained. Complaining meant termination, and termination meant homelessness became not a temporary condition but a permanent state. Understood, Aria said quietly. Good girl. He patted her shoulder, his hand lingering a moment too long. You are learning. She moved away from him, beginning to set water glasses on the tables in her station. She was invisible here. She had learned to move through the restaurant as though she were not quite there, a ghost that served and cleared and asked if everything was acceptable without existing in the customer's awareness. It was a useful skill. Invisibility kept you safe. At 7:15, Giovanni Caruso arrived at his private booth in the back corner, the one where candlelight turned the wine the color of old blood. He was accompanied by two men, Bruno, tall and scarred, with shoulders that suggested a life spent moving heavy things, and Franco, smaller but with eyes that missed nothing. Giovanni wore a white shirt open at the collar, revealing the strong line of his chest. A gold watch caught the light on his left wrist. His presence changed the air in the restaurant. Waiters moved more carefully. Conversations quieted. He saw Aria immediately. She was clearing a table near his booth, her movements efficient and invisible, her head down as she had trained it to be. But Giovanni recognized her instantly, not just because he had seen her 3 hours earlier, but because something in his body had marked her as significant. Recognition at the cellular level. His eyes followed her as she moved between tables, disappearing into the kitchen, reappearing with a tray balanced against her hip. Bruno noticed the direction of his gaze and exchanged a look with Franco. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Caruso, they had never seen him watch anyone like this. It was not desire, exactly. It was closer to recognition. As if he had been waiting for her to arrive without knowing it. At the bar near the front of the restaurant, Margaret Harrington sat on a bar stool with a glass of champagne balanced between her long fingers. She was 61 years old but had paid enough money to appear 50, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her jewelry understated but worth more than most people's houses. She was the silent owner of Caruso's, the financier who had invested in Douglas Hale's management precisely because he was corruptible, predictable, and useful. She watched her partner Douglas with the contempt of someone who understood exactly how small he was. Then she noticed Giovanni's attention had shifted. She followed his gaze and saw a young woman in a waitress uniform, invisible to everyone else in the restaurant, clearing a water glass from table 7. Margaret's eyes narrowed with the precision of someone who had just identified a threat. She set down her champagne and stood, moving toward Giovanni's booth with the ease of someone accustomed to being admitted into any space. Giovanni, she said warmly, her voice like honey poured over broken glass. How lovely to see you. I heard your daughter had quite an adventure today. Some brave soul saved her from a terrible accident. Giovanni looked at her without warmth. Sit, Margaret. We should talk about the future direction of this restaurant. But what happened next was something neither of them fully understood in that moment. What happened next was the sound of destiny being rewritten. Not with violence, but with attention. Not with weapons, but with recognition. Because as Aria Voss moved through the candlelit dining room, invisible to everyone but one man, that man had already decided something that would change the trajectory of her entire life. He had watched a stranger pull his daughter back from the edge of oblivion, and something in his chest that had been frozen for 15 years had begun, slowly, to thaw. In 3 days, when Aria's storage unit came due, she would face the impossible mathematics of her survival. She did not know it yet. But salvation was already moving toward her, wrapped in expensive fabric, driven by a code of honor that understood mercy as a form of power. And Margaret Harrington, sitting across from Giovanni Caruso in that candlelit booth, had just recognized that this invisible girl had become dangerous simply by existing in his orbit. The storage unit manager's voice crackled through Aria's phone like a transmission from another world. "Ms. Voss, your account has been paid in full. $35,000. Anonymous donor." Aria stood in the laundromat parking lot, the November wind cutting through her thin jacket, the phone trembling against her ear. She counted the words again inside her head, as if repetition might make them real. 35,000. The number that had lived in her nightmares for 6 months, the impossible mathematics of survival, had simply ceased to exist. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Can you say that again?" The manager repeated it. Then there was silence on the line, but it was the silence of a door opening, of air rushing in where there had only been walls. 2 hours later, another call came. This one from the city housing office. An apartment had been approved for her through an emergency placement program. 6 months prepaid. Move-in ready. Aria held the phone away from her ear, staring at it as if it might explain itself. She had applied for that program 2 months ago and been rejected. Now, suddenly, mysteriously, she was approved. She did not know that Giovanni Caruso had made a single phone call at 7 in the morning, his voice quiet and absolute. "Make it happen. Whatever you need, make it happen." The program director had heard about Giovanni Caruso. Everyone in Los Angeles had heard about him. The application was approved within the hour. That evening, Aria packed everything she owned into her Subaru and drove to the address they had given her. The apartment building was on 7th Street, 5 stories of pale brick and ordinary windows. Nothing grand. Nothing that would frighten her. She climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, Unit 307, and opened the door to a small one-bedroom with clean walls and afternoon light slanting through windows she had the right to open. The floors were bare wood. The kitchen was modest. The bedroom held a single bed frame with a new mattress, white sheets, 2 pillows. It was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. Aria sat on the floor of the empty living room and cried. Not the small, silent tears she had learned to shed in the front seat of her Subaru, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from the place inside her where hope had been pronounced dead months ago. She pulled the worn prayer card from her pocket, her mother's prayer card, the last physical thing she owned that mattered, and held it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty room. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." She did not know who had done this. She did not know that 50 miles away, Giovanni Caruso sat in his study staring at nothing, listening to his daughter Emma describe her day at school, and thinking about a woman who had thrown herself into traffic to save a life that was not hers. 3 days later, the boxes arrived. The storage unit contents came in a climate-controlled moving truck, and Aria watched from her apartment window as men she did not know carried in the boxes that held her entire history. Photo albums. Her mother's winter coat, which still held the faint smell of her perfume, rose, and something darker, something Aria could not name. A jewelry box with her grandmother's silver ring, worthless to everyone but her. Letters. Medical documents. The physical evidence that her mother had existed, had loved her, had left behind more than just a prayer card and a broken daughter. That night, Aria sorted through everything by candlelight. She discovered photographs she had forgotten, her mother at 25, radiant, standing in front of a car that seemed to belong to a different life. Her mother holding infant Aria, exhaustion and joy written across her face in equal measure. Her mother at the hospital, 3 weeks before she died, her hand reaching toward the camera as if trying to touch someone through time. Aria arranged these photographs on the windowsill of her bedroom. For the first time in months, she was not living in darkness. For the first time in years, she was not running. But at that same hour, across the city in the restaurant's back office, Douglas Hale received a text message from Margaret Harrington. The message contained only 2 words, "Do it." Douglas stared at the screen, his hands shaking. He had spent the last 3 weeks watching Aria Voss transform. He had seen her arrive at work with new light in her eyes. He had overheard her mention an apartment to one of the other servers. He had understood, with growing terror, that whatever he had done to her was being undone by someone far more powerful than himself. Margaret wanted him to accelerate the timeline. Margaret wanted him to destroy her before she became truly untouchable. The next morning, Douglas waited for Aria to arrive for her shift. She came in at 7, 15 minutes early, smiling in a way he had never seen before. She was wearing the same black uniform, but something had changed. She moved through the restaurant like she belonged there, like she had a home to return to, like she was not a ghost haunting the spaces between other people's lives. Douglas intercepted her before she could clock in. "Aria," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." They stepped into his office, a windowless room that smelled of old coffee and photocopier toner. Douglas's hands were wet. He wiped them on his pants. "I'm going to have to let you go. We're downsizing. Restaurant restructuring. Your position is being eliminated." Aria stared at him. "But I was just assigned to." "Doesn't matter," Douglas said, the words coming faster now, as if he needed to get through this before he lost his nerve. "You need to leave. And you should know, I've already called every restaurant within 50 miles. I've told them you're unreliable. Stealing. They won't hire you anywhere." Aria felt something cold and familiar settle in her chest. The feeling of ground disappearing beneath her feet. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Douglas could not look at her. "Because I was told to. And the person who told me is far more powerful than either of us." She walked out of Caruso's at 7:23 in the morning. She did not take off her apron. She did not clock out. She simply walked through the kitchen where she had spent the last 4 months clearing other people's plates, and out into the parking lot where her Subaru waited like a patient animal. She sat in the driver's seat, hands on the steering wheel, and tried to understand what had changed. For 3 days, she had believed in miracles. 3 days was not enough. At that same moment, Giovanni Caruso was in his office on the 22nd floor of the Caruso building downtown. Bruno came in with a tablet, showing him the security footage from Caruso's restaurant. Giovanni watched as Douglas Hale intercepted Aria, watched her face transform from peace to something broken, watched her walk out of the restaurant without looking back. Giovanni did not move. He did not speak. Bruno had learned long ago that silence was sometimes more dangerous than rage. "He just fired her," Bruno said, stating the obvious because Giovanni was not asking for clarity. "And he told her he destroyed her reputation." Giovanni set down his pen. He removed his reading glasses, expensive, wire-rimmed, the kind of small luxury that marked the distance between his world and Aria's. "Find out why. Find out who gave him the order." Bruno's phone was already to his ear. 2 hours later, they had their answer. Margaret Harrington. The restaurant's silent partner, the woman who sat at the bar with champagne and calculated risks, had ordered Douglas Hale to destroy Aria. And the reason was becoming clear through the investigation that Bruno and Franco had been running for 3 months. Margaret and Douglas had been skimming money from Giovanni's territory. They had a deal with the Santoro organization, Giovanni's rivals, to funnel his profits out of the city. They had been stealing from him for 2 years. They had been waiting for the perfect moment to disappear with $8 million. But then Aria Voss had pulled Emma out of traffic. And Giovanni Caruso had noticed her. And everything had become complicated. Giovanni stood and walked to the window. Los Angeles spread below him, 7 million people living their small lives, unaware of the networks of power that held the city together and held it apart. Somewhere out there, in a Subaru in a parking lot, a woman who had shown him mercy was learning that mercy was not enough to survive. Somewhere in a penthouse, Margaret Harrington was packing a suitcase and making arrangements to disappear. Somewhere in a cheap office, Douglas Hale was waiting for his final instructions. Giovanni picked up his phone. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and absolute. "Find her. Bring her to the house. Tell her I need to explain something. Tell her that what happened this morning was not her fault, and that I have been lying to her through silence for 3 months. Tell her the truth." He paused. "And put Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington under surveillance. I want to know every move they make, every call they receive, every breath they take." Bruno and Franco exchanged one of their looks, the kind they had been exchanging for 15 years, the kind that said they had seen Giovanni Caruso make many decisions, but never one quite like this. By 8 in the evening, Aria sat in the back of a black Mercedes, watching the city blur past the windows. The man who drove her, Bruno, she would later learn, had found her in the laundromat parking lot where she had sat since leaving Caruso's. He had approached the car window with his hands visible, moving slowly, showing respect to her fear. "Mr. Caruso wants to speak with you," he had said. "About what happened this morning. About why it happened. He says it is important." Aria had not known what to do. She had sat in silence for a long moment, then nodded. Now she was driving toward the hills, toward whatever was coming next, holding the worn prayer card in her pocket like a talisman. The city lights fell away behind them, and the night opened up like a door. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. 3 days had passed since Aria moved into the apartment Giovanni arranged for her. 3 days of waking in a bed that was actually hers, of showering with hot water that did not run out, of standing in a kitchen that smelled like possibility instead of desperation. She had allowed herself to believe that the worst was behind her. That belief was a luxury she could not afford. The afternoon was cold when she arrived at Caruso's for her shift. October had turned bitter, the kind of cold that cuts through fabric and settles in your bones. She pushed through the back entrance, still wearing the coat Giovanni had given her, still feeling like an imposter in clothes that fit properly. The kitchen was already humming with preparation for the dinner service. Pots steamed. Knives moved across cutting boards in practiced rhythm. She should have noticed the silence of the dining room, the absence of the usual noise. Instead, she was thinking about the mail that had arrived at her apartment that morning, a letter from the community college about evening classes, about a future that might actually exist. Douglas Hale was waiting for her in the small office off the kitchen. His face was the color of old brick, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. Margaret Harrington stood beside him, her expression carved from ice. "You are fired," Douglas spat the words like they tasted of poison. "Effective immediately. Get your things and get out." Aria felt the ground tilt beneath her. The world had done this before, shifted without warning, collapsed the careful structures she had built. Her voice came out small, fractured. "What? Why? What did I? You think you are special?" Douglas stepped toward her, and she could see the desperation in his eyes, the panic underneath the rage. "You think someone paying your debts makes you untouchable? That you can work here and ruin everything I have built? I never did anything to." "You made a mistake," Margaret said, her voice soft as a blade. "You believed you could change your circumstances. That is the mistake people like you always make. You forget your place." Douglas grabbed Aria's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough that she knew the bruises would bloom dark and purple by morning. "And if you try to work anywhere in this city, I will make sure every restaurant owner knows you are a thief and a liar. You stole from this establishment. You will be known for that. You will never work in hospitality again." "That is not true, I never," Aria tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened. "Get out before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing on my property." He shoved her toward the door, and she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Her palm scraped against concrete. The kitchen had gone silent. Every person there was looking away, the way people look away from something shameful. She could feel their discomfort, their relief that it was not them. She grabbed her coat from the hook and walked out into the October afternoon, her legs moving on their own, her mind 3 steps behind reality. By the time evening fell, she was sitting on the floor of her apartment in the dark. She had not turned on the lights. Outside, the city was beginning its nightly pulse, cars moving through streets, people going to places where they belonged. She sat with her back against the wall, her hands trembling. In her pocket was $47. $47 and a worn prayer card with her mother's face barely visible anymore, the photograph rubbed thin from so many desperate prayers. The apartment rent was paid through the end of the month. After that, she had nothing. Food was not paid for. Utilities were not paid for. Douglas's threat echoed in the space of her skull, blacklisted from every restaurant in Los Angeles. The words meant one thing. She was finished. She thought of the laundromat parking lot, the sleeping bag, the thermos she refilled at gas station bathrooms. She thought of the storage unit being repossessed, the last photographs of her mother about to be thrown away. She thought of Emma Caruso's small hand in hers, the child's weight against her chest, the girl's heartbeat slowing as she realized she was safe. That seemed like something from another life. Around midnight, she walked to the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. There was a small bottle there, left by the previous tenant, she assumed. Sleeping pills. The label was worn, the expiration date 3 years past. She picked it up and stood there in the darkness, staring at her reflection in the mirror. A face looked back at her that she barely recognized. Hollow eyes. Cheekbones that jutted sharp and angular. Skin that had gone grey from too many nights sleeping in a car. This woman had nothing left to give. This woman had nothing. She opened the bottle. The pills rattled inside like a small prayer. Then, through the paper-thin walls of the apartment, a child's laugh cut through the silence. A little girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, was laughing with the kind of unself-conscious joy that only children possess. The sound was bright and pure, the way light looks when it passes through clean water. Aria closed her eyes. She could see Emma Caruso's face that day in October, could see the girl's eyes going wide with terror, could feel the weight of the child's body as she pulled her from the street. She had saved that life. She had moved without thinking, without weighing the odds, without calculating whether it was worth the risk. She had simply acted. That has to mean something. The bottle slipped from her hand. Pills scattered across the bathroom tile like confetti, like the snow that had not yet come to Los Angeles. Aria slid down the wall and wept, not the kind of weeping that brought relief, but the kind that tore through her like a blade, that broke open everything she had been holding inside since she was small enough to fit in a closet while her mother screamed in the next room. When the tears finally stopped, it was past 2 in the morning. The child next door had been asleep for hours. The city outside her window had gone quiet. Aria pulled herself up from the bathroom floor and looked at herself again. Still hollow. Still grey. Still terrified. But still alive. Still capable of being saved. She went to the living room and sat on the edge of the couch. Her phone, an old one that Giovanni had given her, the kind that received calls, sat on the table. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked it up and called the number she had memorized 3 days ago, the number she had sworn she would never use. Bruno answered on the first ring. He had been waiting for her to call. Meanwhile, across the city in the restaurant, Giovanni was arriving for his usual table. The Mercedes pulled up to the curb precisely at 7 in the evening. Bruno and Franco emerged first, checking the perimeter the way they checked every perimeter, with the practiced efficiency of men who had kept their boss alive through 15 years of territorial warfare, betrayal, and blood. Giovanni stepped out of the car with the coat draped across his shoulders, cashmere, the color of smoke, worth more than Aria's old annual salary. He moved through the dining room the way a general surveys a battlefield, taking in every detail with dark eyes that missed nothing. The room quieted. People straightened in their seats. Even those who did not know who he was could feel the shift in the air, the way a room changes when power enters. Douglas Hale approached, his mouth already forming the words of greeting. "Mr. Caruso, good evening. Your usual table. Where is Aria Voss?" Giovanni's voice was quiet, which made it worse. Quiet meant control. Quiet meant he had already decided what would happen next. Douglas's face went the color of bone. She no longer works here. Had to let her go this afternoon. Performance issues. Nothing serious, just not a good fit for. Giovanni did not move. He simply stood there, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that changes people. "You fired her." I run this restaurant, I make staffing decisions. In one motion, Giovanni closed the distance between them. His hand found Douglas's throat and slammed him against the wall so hard that the impact shook the wine glasses on nearby tables. The entire dining room became a held breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the waiters with their trays stopped mid-stride. You stole her tips for 6 months, Giovanni said, his voice still quiet, still controlled, which was somehow more terrifying than rage. You worked her 18-hour shifts and threatened her with termination if she complained. You pocketed cash that belonged to a woman who had $34 in her pocket. $34. He paused. And now you fired her and blacklisted her across this entire city because Margaret Harrington told you to destroy her. Douglas was choking, his hands clawing at Giovanni's forearm, his face turning purple. His eyes were bulging, the white showing all around the irises like a terrified animal. Because Margaret knew Aria mattered to me. Giovanni released him. Douglas collapsed to the floor, gasping, his body folding like a broken marionette. Giovanni straightened his coat. Bruno and Franco stepped forward with a kind of synchronized movement that suggested they had done this before. Giovanni looked at Bruno. Get Margaret Harrington. Bring her to the warehouse. Now. He turned and walked out of the restaurant without ordering. Without sitting. Without another word. 2 hours later, the warehouse stood dark against the October night. Industrial district. Abandoned. The kind of place where sounds echoed wrong, where concrete held the memory of everything done on its surface. Margaret Harrington was thrown through the side door by Franco and 2 other men whose names she would never learn. Her expensive dress was torn. Her hair had come loose from its careful styling. One eye was beginning to swell where she had tried to resist. Douglas Hale was already there, tied to a metal chair, weeping. His hands were shaking so badly that his fingers drummed against the armrests in an involuntary rhythm. Around the perimeter stood 12 men in black, Giovanni's crew. The soldiers. The men who had followed him through wars and betrayals and the slow calculus of power. Giovanni stood in the center of the space, his coat removed, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked at Margaret with an expression that suggested he was studying something particularly repulsive under a microscope. You made a deal with the Santoro family, he said. My brother's allies. You have been skimming from my territory for 3 years, using this restaurant as a front for money laundering and drug distribution. When Aria Voss saved my daughter's life, when I began showing interest in her, you realized she might ask questions about the restaurant's finances. You realized she might be a threat to your operation. Margaret tried to straighten, tried to maintain some semblance of dignity. She is nobody. A homeless girl who got lucky one day. She means nothing. Giovanni moved like a serpent. His hand connected with her face, a backhand that snapped her head sideways and drew blood from her lip. She saved my daughter's life. She is worth 1,000 of you. Douglas was sobbing, the kind of desperate weeping that stripped away any dignity he had ever possessed. Please, please, I just did what she told me to do. I did not want to hurt anyone. I was just following orders. You stole from a woman who had nothing, Giovanni said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute finality. You threatened her. You enjoyed your power over someone helpless. He turned to Bruno without looking away from Douglas. Call the Santoros. Tell them I have a gift for them. Tell them I have the people who sold them out to the FBI last year. Margaret's face went white. No. No, Giovanni, please, just kill me. Please just kill me. Death is too quick, Giovanni said. Death is too easy. Too merciful. The Santoros have been looking for who betrayed them to federal authorities. They have been looking for 3 years. The answer is sitting in this room. Margaret began screaming then, a sound that echoed through the warehouse and shattered against the concrete walls. She lunged toward the door, but Franco caught her easily, held her as she thrashed and clawed. We will take you apart, she gasped, looking at Giovanni with eyes that had suddenly gone completely mad. "Your brother will come for you. The Caruso family will." "My brother is dead," Giovanni said flatly. "He has been dead for 12 years. And the Caruso family is me. So your threats are empty words from an empty woman." 3 black SUVs arrived 20 minutes later. Men emerged, Santoro soldiers, their faces like stone, their eyes like winter. The captain was named Vincent Santoro, and he had been searching for the people who had destroyed his operation for 36 months. He looked at Margaret with an expression that could not quite be called a smile. "Giovanni, you said you had a gift. They betrayed you to the feds. They skimmed from both our territories. They sent information to the federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. They are yours now." Vincent's actual smile appeared then, not a kind smile. Not a smile that held anything resembling mercy. Margaret was dragged away screaming, clawing at the ground, her fingers leaving bloody marks on the concrete. Douglas was thrown into a van, his cries muffled by the metal doors. The vehicles disappeared into the night, their tail lights fading like dying stars. Giovanni stood alone in the warehouse. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. Bruno approached quietly, respectfully. "It is done," he said. Giovanni shook his head slowly. "No. It is not done until I tell her the truth. Until I tell her why I have been watching her. Why I arranged everything. Until I tell her that the man she saved my daughter from was not accident but design." He was standing very still, and in that stillness was the weight of what was coming next, the moment when he would have to reveal himself completely, when he would have to open the fortress he had built around his heart and show Aria the man inside. 2 weeks had passed since Margaret Harrington screamed in the warehouse, since Douglas Hale disappeared into the night like a ghost that should never have haunted the living. 2 weeks of silence from Giovanni Caruso. 2 weeks of Aria Voss rebuilding what remained of herself in a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Echo Park, where the rent was paid by someone whose name she did not know, whose generosity she did not understand. She had moved the prayer card her mother gave her to the windowsill above the kitchen sink. She placed the photographs, the ones she had rescued from storage before the foreclosure locked them away forever, in frames she found at a dollar store. An old woman's face smiled from a coffee table. A young girl, 7 years old, stood in a garden wearing a white dress. Her mother. Before the sickness. Before everything broke. The apartment was small, but it was hers, and the walls no longer felt like a tomb. Aria had found work at a diner called Stella's, 3 miles from Caruso's restaurant, far enough away that she would not see Douglas Hale's face again, far enough away that she could pretend the last 3 months had been a nightmare she had woken from. The pay was minimum wage. The tips were honest. No one pocketed her money. No manager scheduled her for 18-hour shifts that turned her hands to leather and her eyes to hollow glass. It was enough. The day had been long, her feet ached from the morning rush, from standing on concrete, from the weight of carrying other people's hunger. She pushed open the apartment door at 6:11 in the evening, the sky turning the color of burnt copper, the October wind carrying the smell of someone's dinner cooking 2 apartments down. The knock came at 7:15. 3 soft raps. Patient. Not threatening. Aria froze with her hand on the kitchen counter, where she had been pouring water for tea. She had no visitors. She knew no one in this city except Bruno, who brought her paychecks, and even he had not come to the apartment since the first day. She opened the door. Giovanni Caruso stood in the hallway, alone. No black SUV visible through the window. No men in dark suits standing at the stairs. Just him, wearing jeans and a simple coat of dark wool, looking almost ordinary, almost vulnerable. His dark eyes held something she had not expected, hesitation. "Aria Voss," he said quietly. "May I come in?" She recognized him immediately. The man from the street 3 months ago, when Emma had chased the red balloon. The man from the restaurant, watching her move between tables with an intensity that had made her skin crawl with the knowledge that someone powerful was paying attention to her invisibility. "Mr. Caruso." Confusion and fear moved across her face like clouds before a storm. Why are you? I need to tell you something, he said, and the weight in his voice made her step back, made her gesture him inside. After I tell you, if you want me to leave and never return, I will. But you deserve the truth. They sat in her small living room, on a second-hand couch she had bought for $90. Giovanni did not sit in the position of power, he did not lean back, did not take up space with his shoulders. He folded his hands, and she noticed his gold watch, understated but real, worth more than her first month's rent. 3 months ago, you saved my daughter's life, he began. You pulled Emma from the path of a car. You held her while she cried. You did not know who she was. You did not know who I was. You did it because it was the right thing. Aria said nothing. She waited. I watched you walk to the restaurant that same evening. I saw you enter Caruso's, and I recognized you immediately. I also saw how Douglas Hale treated you. How he stole from you. How he scheduled you until your hand shook when you held a plate. I watched him threaten you. You watched, Aria's voice broke. You watched me. I did, Giovanni said, and there was no apology in his tone, only truth. Bruno followed you when you left work. I learned you were homeless. That you slept in your car. That you had $34 in your pocket and an eviction notice on a storage unit holding the last photographs of your mother. Aria stood abruptly. She walked to the window, where the prayer card rested on the sill, and she did not turn around. Why? She whispered. Because you showed mercy when you had nothing, Giovanni said. In my world, mercy is a luxury. People do not offer kindness without expecting payment. But you did. You were invisible, and you still chose to be good. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither of them fully believed would hold. I paid your storage debt, he continued quietly. I arranged this apartment. The first month, the second month. I am telling you now because I will not keep it hidden anymore. You deserve to know who helped you and why. Aria turned. Tears ran down her face, and she did not wipe them away. I am nobody, she said. I am a homeless woman who busses tables. I have nothing to offer you. Whatever this is, whatever you want. I want nothing, Giovanni interrupted, his voice steady as stone. Not even gratitude. You saved my daughter from a car. I saved you from drowning. We are equal. Douglas fired me, Aria said. He called every restaurant in the area. He said I was blacklisted, that no one would hire me. Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington are gone, Giovanni said. They will never hurt you again. Or anyone else. She heard something in his tone that told her not to ask for details. She heard the finality of it, the kind of finality that only comes when a man has decided someone's fate and executed it without hesitation. I cannot be with you because I owe you, Aria said, and her voice was firm now, her spine straightening. I cannot be your charity project. I cannot be something you rescued. Giovanni nodded slowly, respect blooming in his eyes. I would not want you to be. And I will not accept protection because I am weak or helpless. I am rebuilding my life, on my terms, with what I can earn myself. If you have paid for this apartment, I will find a way to repay you or I will leave. You will do what you need to do, Giovanni said. He stood, and the movement was graceful, resigned. That is precisely why I am here. Aria looked at him, really looked at him. This man with his gold watch and expensive coat, his eyes that had seen violence, his hands that carried the weight of command. He was waiting for her to speak. Why are you here? She asked. Because I wanted you to know the truth. Because I wanted you to understand that the kindness you received was not because you are weak or helpless or deserving of pity. It was because you showed me something I thought was dead inside me. Mercy. The capacity to choose goodness when it costs you everything. Giovanni walked to the door. His hand rested on the frame, and she saw it tremble slightly. Emma asks about you constantly. She calls you the nice lady who saved me. She says you are her guardian angel. Tell her I am glad she is safe, Aria said. She wants to meet you again. When you are ready. Aria nodded. Giovanni opened the door. The hallway light caught his profile, highlighting the scar that ran from his right eye to his cheekbone, a map of violence she did not ask him to explain. When you have rebuilt your life, he said, and his voice was low, careful, like a man disarming a bomb by hand, when you stand on equal ground with me and owe me nothing, I hope you might let me take you to dinner. Not as someone who helped you, but as someone who simply wants to know you. Aria smiled, small, real, hesitant. Ask me in 6 months. 6 months, he said. He stepped into the hallway, and the door closed with a soft click. She stood alone in her small living room, surrounded by her mother's photographs and plants she had begun to grow. She stood, and for the first time in years, perhaps the first time in her entire life, she felt the weight of invisibility lift from her shoulders like a coat being removed. She felt seen. 6 months passed like pages turning slowly in a book. Summer came to Los Angeles, warm and golden, the kind of heat that made everything glow. Aria Voss stood behind the counter of a small coffee shop on Hillhurst Avenue, a space she had found 3 months ago and rebuilt with her own hands. The walls displayed her mother's photographs, the young woman before sickness, the garden, the white dress. Plants hung from the ceiling in ceramic pots. The air smelled like espresso and fresh bread and something like hope. She was not rich. The loan she had taken required careful counting, every dollar spent with intention. But she was stable. She was hers. The door opened at 6:44 in the evening, and Giovanni Caruso entered with Emma holding his hand. The child was 7 now, bright-eyed, her dark hair braided with ribbons. She wore a second-grade uniform, and when she saw Aria, she broke away from her father and ran. Aria! Aria, I told everyone you are my hero. You saved my life. Aria knelt, held her against her chest. I heard you started 2nd grade. How do you like it? It is good. I have a friend named Sophie. She is scared of the dark, and I tell her that there are nice people in the dark too. I tell her about you. Emma pulled back, studying Aria's face. Are you still sad sometimes? The question was so simple, so devastatingly honest that Aria felt her throat tighten. Yes, she whispered. But I am not sad all the time anymore. Giovanni approached, a soft smile on his face. The shop looks beautiful, Aria. Thank you. It is mine. All mine. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and when Giovanni heard it, something in his chest shifted, rearranged itself into a new configuration. I believe I was supposed to ask, he said. 6 months ago, I asked if I could take you to dinner when you had rebuilt your life. That time has come. Aria looked at him, this man who had protected her in silence, who had given without taking, who had waited until she could stand on equal ground. She looked at Emma, who was watching them both with the innocent hope of a child who wants her world to expand, to include more people, more love. Yes, Aria said. I would like that very much. Emma cheered, spinning in a circle, her ribbons following like colors caught in the wind. Weeks unfolded like flowers blooming. Aria and Giovanni walked through Griffith Park while Emma ran ahead chasing butterflies, her laughter trailing behind her like a ribbon. They sat on benches overlooking the city. They ate meals together. They talked, slowly, carefully, building something that could not be rushed. Giovanni told her about his brother's betrayal, about the choice between mercy and the survival of his empire, about the darkness he had carried for 12 years like a stone in his chest. Aria told him about her mother's death from cancer, about the hospital bills that became a foreclosure, about years of invisibility and the knowledge that survival is not the same as living. They did not move quickly toward each other. Instead, they moved like people learning to trust again, like people relearning that the world contained kindness alongside cruelty. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of Giovanni's penthouse overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, Aria placed her mother's worn prayer card into his hand. She gave this to me when I was small, Aria said. She told me that family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Giovanni held the card carefully, as if it were made of glass. He understood the gift she was offering, not just the card, but permission. Permission to enter her family. Permission to stay. I will stay, he promised. So will I, Aria said. They stood together while the city lights multiplied like stars, and beneath them, invisible but present, Bruno and Franco smiled from their vehicles. They had worked for Giovanni Caruso for 15 years. They had never seen him like this, not broken, not hardened, but whole. The camera pulled back, showing the three of them together, Giovanni with his hand on Emma's shoulder, Aria with her fingers interlaced with his. A family not bound by blood but by choice, by mercy, by the quiet decision to stay when the storm arrives. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will stay with you long after it ends. And remember, mercy is never weakness. Sometimes it is the bravest thing we can offer. Sometimes it saves us all. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.